Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going beyond the headlines today, looking past the numbers and the dramatic footage of wildfires to hear a personal story from someone who lost their home in the 2007 Witch Creek fire in San Diego County.
Wow.
This deep dive is about understanding the human impact of wildfires.
Yeah, the ripple effect, the stuff we don't always see on the news.
Right, exactly. We've got this incredibly personal account.
Oh, wow.
It goes into such detail about what it was like to lose everything and then try to put your life back together.
I can't imagine.
It's a powerful reminder that behind those wildfire statistics, there are real people whose lives are changed forever.
Absolutely.
So to start, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the person sharing their story.
Hmm.
Imagine waking up at 4 a.m. and realizing a wildfire is heading straight for your house.
Oh, God.
And this wasn't just any wildfire.
Right,
This was
right.
during those crazy Santa Ana winds.
Yeah, those are no joke.
Hot, dry gusts from the desert, embers flying everywhere.
They can create a firestorm, where the fire spreads so fast and it's unpredictable.
Oh, wow.
It's terrifying.
The source material describes it as pure chaos, wind gusting like crazy. It's 4 a.m., you've got minutes to evacuate.
Oh, my gosh.
What are you grabbing? What's going through your mind at that point?
I mean, it's fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
You're not thinking clearly, just reacting.
The source talks about that feeling, trying to prioritize what to pack, knowing you might be leaving everything behind.
It's heartbreaking.
And then they had to drive through flames, literally licking at both sides of the driveway to escape.
Gosh, that's intense.
And even when they got out, they still had to wait to find out if their house was gone.
Oh, man, that waiting must have been just agonizing.
It's a good point about wildfires,
Yeah,
how they're so unpredictable.
exactly.
They can erupt and spread so quickly, unlike some other natural disasters.
It's what makes them so dangerous.
It's terrifying. Then there's the immediate aftermath, and I was struck by how much this source talks about dealing with the media.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other layer.
Right. After something like this happens, there's a media frenzy.
It's like they just descend.
And for the people who have just gone through this trauma, it must be so overwhelming.
Absolutely, and sometimes it can feel exploitative.
There's this anecdote that really got to me.
Oh, yeah?
The person sharing this story talks about how reporters wanted her and her sister to look more upset for the cameras while they were sorting through donated clothes.
Seriously.
Like they were being asked to perform their grief.
Wow.
That just seems so wrong.
It says a lot about how we view suffering, doesn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, there's this expectation that grief has to be publicly visible.
Ah, I see.
And then if it's not, then it's somehow not real or not worthy of attention.
It's like there's a script for how to act when something terrible happens.
In a way, yeah. But everyone processes trauma differently.
Right.
And the media, focusing only on outward displays of grief, ignores all the internal turmoil that might not be so obvious.
It's a good reminder to be mindful and respectful of individual experiences.
For sure.
Then the story shifts to rebuilding. And it's clear that it's about so much more than just replacing stuff.
Absolutely. It's trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy, a routine, an identity that was disrupted.
Imagine having to replace everything from your toothbrush to your furniture. That's got to be so unsettling.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's not just an inconvenience, it shakes you to your core.
Right. The source talks about this weird feeling of unlimited shopping that comes from having to replace everything.
I could see that.
You're buying things you need, but it's not the same as having those familiar objects, the things that held memories and meaning.
You can replace the stuff, but not the feeling, the history.
And it made me think about those little things we take for granted.
Like what?
That comfy old sweater or the mug you always use for your coffee.
Yeah.
They hold sentimental value that a new version just can't replicate.
It's like losing a tangible link to your past.
The source specifically mentions missing the comfort of old clothes. Those items you've had for years, they're almost like a second skin.
Yeah, like an extension of yourself.
Losing those must feel like losing a part of yourself.
For sure.
There's also this constant struggle of want versus need.
Oh, I bet.
You're making so many decisions while still processing the trauma of the fire, and it's just overwhelming.
And on top of that, the initial outpouring of support from the community, which is amazing, it eventually fades.
Right.
And survivors are often left to navigate the long-term recovery process largely on their own.
Which brings us to those long-term impacts, the stuff we don't always hear about.
Right. What happens after the initial shock wears off?
What are some of the things fire survivors might deal with years down the line?
Well, one common experience is what we call anniversary reactions.
What are those?
There are psychological and emotional responses that can happen around the anniversary of the fire,
Oh, wow.
or even during things that remind you of the fire, like strong winds or the smell of smoke.
So it's like a resurgence of that initial trauma.
Exactly. And it can manifest in different ways. Anxiety, flashbacks, trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating.
That makes sense. The person sharing their story describes the years after the fire as a blur, like a trauma block.
It's your brain trying to protect itself from being overwhelmed by the emotions of that event.
It's a reminder that recovery from trauma isn't linear.
Absolutely.
There are setbacks, triggers, and challenges that survivors have to learn to navigate.
And it takes time. There's no right or wrong way to grieve or cope.
Here's where the story takes an interesting turn.
Okay.
The street they lived on was called Corazon Place, which means heart in Spanish.
Wow, what a coincidence.
It's kind of poetic, considering everything she went through.
It's a powerful symbol for her changing idea of home.
Right. She starts to realize that home isn't just the building.
Right.
It's more about the people in her life, the connections that got her through this.
That resonates with the idea of resilience.
Yeah.
The ability to adapt and find new sources of strength and meaning after something terrible happens.
So even though she lost her house, she found a deeper sense of belonging through those connections.
Exactly. It speaks to the human capacity for growth and transformation, even after devastating loss.
That's powerful. But then there's the reality of what was lost forever.
Yeah.
She talks about realizing she can't wear her mother's wedding dupatta at her own wedding because it was destroyed in the fire.
That's heartbreaking.
It gets at the heart of what makes wildfire loss so unique, losing those irreplaceable pieces of family history and personal identity.
Things that insurance can't cover, no amount of shopping can replace.
It makes you think about all those seemingly insignificant objects that connect us to our past.
Absolutely, those tangible links to our memories and who we are.
And it makes you appreciate them even more.
For sure.
It's a reminder to cherish those connections because they're the foundation of resilience when you face something like this.
They help you get through.
And she takes time to acknowledge the firefighters and first responders who risk their lives fighting these fires.
Yes, absolutely. They're the unsung heroes.
It's a powerful message of gratitude.
Yeah.
And a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's hope and humanity.
So true.
I think this deep dive is really showing that wildfires are so much more than just property damage.
I agree.
It's about the human cost, the trauma, the loss, the long road to recovery.
It speaks to the strength of the human spirit, but also to the need for greater awareness and support.
We often see the dramatic fire footage,
Right.
but we rarely see the long-term impact on the people who live through it.
And those individual stories are where we find the true depth of the issue.
It makes you think about how we as individuals and as a society can offer more than just temporary help.
Right. We need lasting support that addresses the real needs of fire survivors.
We're just scratching the surface here, but already this deep dive is giving us a powerful perspective on the human dimension of wildfire.
It's about connecting with those affected on a deeper level.
And understanding that behind the numbers and headlines, there are people carrying the weight of these experiences.
For sure.
It makes you wonder, how can we better support those impacted by wildfires? What steps can we take to mitigate these risks and protect our communities?
Important questions.
And how can we create a sense of connection and belonging that goes beyond just physical space?
Deep stuff.
Let's take a moment to let all of this sink in before we move on to the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. You know, it's striking how this story makes us rethink what home really means.
Yeah, it makes you question what's important when the place you called home is gone.
Right. Where do you find comfort and connection when that sense of stability is shattered?
Exactly. And this account really dives deep into that.
It does.
She talks about rebuilding a beautiful new house, but still feeling guilty.
Oh, wow.
She says she couldn't fully enjoy it because she kept comparing it to the home she lost,
I can see that.
like a shadow hanging over everything.
Yeah, grief can be like that.
It affects even the good things.
Absolutely. It's a reminder of what you can never get back.
She describes feeling like a guest in her own home. Like no matter how perfect the new house was, something wasn't right.
It's a paradox.
Right. You have this brand new house, everything's fresh, but it's missing something.
That soul of the old one.
Exactly. And there's this one story that really hit me.
What's that?
She talks about planning her wedding and realizing she could never wear her mother's wedding dupatta
Oh, no.
because it was lost in the fire.
It's those irreplaceable things that make wildfire loss so different.
It's not just stuff, it's Pieces of family history, personal identity, cultural heritage.
Those are the things you can't just buy again.
It makes you realize how important those little things are,
Yeah, the things that connect us to our past.
and it makes you want to hold on to them even tighter.
Absolutely. Preserving those memories, whether it's through photos, stories, or traditions.
It's about keeping those connections alive,
Exactly.
which brings us back to resilience. How does her story show us that?
Remember how her street was called Corazon Place?
Yeah, heart in Spanish.
Like it was meant to be.
It really is.
She starts to see that home isn't just a building, it's about the people she loves.
It's the people who were there for her.
The ones who helped her rebuild, shared her grief and joy.
So even though she lost her house, she found a different kind of belonging,
Exactly. That's what resilience is.
finding strength and meaning after something awful happens.
It's about realizing that even when you lose so much, the things that really matter are the connections you have.
It's a powerful message.
It makes you rethink what's truly important in life.
Right. It's not about possessions. It's about relationships, the people we share our lives with.
It's about those bonds that go beyond material things, those shared values and experiences.
And it makes you think about how we can support those who've been through something like this.
Absolutely. How can we help people who've lost so much?
We often focus on immediate needs like shelter and food.
Which are crucial, of course.
But what about the long-term emotional support?
That's where we often fall short.
It's tough to know what to say or do.
We're not comfortable with grief as a society.
We want to fix it, make it go away.
But real healing takes time.
It's about acknowledging the pain, listening without judgment.
Giving people space to express their feelings.
And sometimes it's about recognizing when someone needs professional help.
Absolutely. There's no shame in that.
Trauma can have lasting effects, and seeking help is a sign of strength.
For sure.
It's not just about individual support, though. It's about how communities prepare for these events.
It's a huge issue.
It goes way beyond firefighting.
Land management, building codes, being ready for when it happens.
Recognizing that wildfires are a challenge we face together.
Absolutely a collective responsibility.
At the end of her account, she expresses gratitude for the firefighters and first responders.
The people who run toward danger while everyone else runs away.
It's a reminder of the courage and compassion that people are capable of.
It's truly inspiring.
It's a bright spot in a dark situation.
Yeah, those acts of heroism and selflessness.
So what do you think is the main takeaway for our listener today?
I hope they come away with a better understanding of how wildfires affect people.
It's not just about the damage we see.
It's the emotional and psychological impact on individuals and communities.
It's about understanding how complex grief is and how long the road to recovery can be.
It's about fostering resilience, both personally and as a society.
Wildfires are a serious issue, and it requires us to pay attention, be empathetic, and take action.
For sure.
Rebuilding after a wildfire isn't just about replacing what's lost. It's about finding strength and a sense of belonging amidst that loss.
And remembering that home is more than just a place. It's those connections we have with people.
This deep dive has been so insightful.
It has.
It's made me appreciate my own sense of home and those relationships that matter most.
It reminds us that even in the face of loss, there's hope, resilience, and the potential for growth.
And it challenges us to think about how we can be part of the solution as we face this growing threat of wildfires.
Absolutely. There's a lot to think about.
Let's pause here and reflect on these powerful insights before we move on to the final part of our deep dive. This deep dive has been heavy, hasn't it?
It has.
From the terror of having to evacuate to realizing that home is more about the people around you than the place itself.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It makes you think about how we often only see the immediate aftermath of wildfires.
Right.
The news footage, the damage, the firefighters. But we rarely see the long road to recovery that people face.
It's easy to forget about the individuals behind the headlines.
Right, they're dealing with the emotional and psychological effects long after everyone else has moved on.
It's so true.
And rebuilding after a wildfire isn't just about getting new stuff, it's about rebuilding your whole life.
Exactly.
This story really captures that struggle.
It does.
Remember she described the years after the fire as a trauma block?
Yeah, like a fog.
It shows how these events can really mess with your memory and your emotions.
Trauma changes you.
And then there's the guilt she felt about not being able to fully enjoy her new house.
I remember that.
It's a reminder that grief hangs around, even when things seem good on the surface.
Healing's not a straight line.
Nope, there are setbacks and triggers along the way.
It's so important to remember that.
We expect people to just bounce back after something like this, but it takes time.
It does.
And those anniversary reactions she talked about, that's proof that grief can come back even years later.
It can.
It makes you realize how important it is to support fire survivors, not just right after the fire, but for the long haul.
For sure.
So beyond those initial donations, how can we better support people who've been through something like this?
I think it starts with understanding that the effects of a wildfire can last for years, maybe even decades.
Right. It's not a quick fix.
And we need to create space for people to share their stories and grieve at their own pace without judgment.
And remembering that there's no right way to heal.
Everyone's different.
It's about offering support that actually meets their needs.
Like counseling, support groups, just being someone who listens.
And sometimes recognizing when someone needs professional help.
Yeah, there's no shame in that.
It takes strength to ask for help, especially after experiencing trauma.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about individual support.
Right.
How do communities prepare for these increasingly frequent wildfires?
That's a big one.
It's more than just firefighting.
It's land management, building codes, community preparedness.
We need to change our mindset and realize that this is a challenge we face together.
I agree.
She ends her account by thanking the firefighters and first responders.
The people who put their lives on the line for others.
Yeah, it's such a powerful reminder of human courage and compassion.
They're true heroes.
Their bravery is incredible. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I hope they understand that wildfires have a huge impact on people.
It's not just about the stuff that gets burned.
It's the lasting effects on individuals, families, and whole communities.
It's about the pain of loss, the long road to recovery, and building resilience.
We need to be more aware, more empathetic, and more prepared.
Wildfires are a complex issue that demands our attention and our action.
They do.
This deep dive has really given us a lot to think about.
It has.
It reminds us that even in the face of terrible loss, there's still hope, resilience, and the potential for growth.
It's a powerful message.
It encourages us to connect with those who've been affected and to be part of the solution.
I hope our listeners take that to heart.
It's been an incredible journey. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.